To share a bit about Pere and who he really was, what he stood for, the ideals he wished upon all of you, is an alumnus who knew Pere very well. Originally from Bethune, Saskatchewan, he came to Notre Dame in 1969, graduated from the arts program in 1972, and then went on to complete his B.Ed at St. FX before returning to Wilcox for 30 years. He taught, he coached, he was the principal of Notre Dame, vice president, and even was the mayor of Wilcox at one point. And he was actually telling me a story last night that he was actually a senior provincial D champion in hockey as well. And he shared a story about former President Terry O'Malley was on that team, and O'Malley just returned from the Olympics. He was 39 years old. And when they won the championship, he said O'Malley played 58 minutes in the championship game, and he said it would have been 60, but he got a 2-minute penalty. So together with his wife Debbie, they've raised 3 hounds who have all gone on to be tremendous parents to their 7 grandchildren, as well as being accomplished professionals at the NCAA and NHL levels of hockey. Retiring from Notre Dame in 2003, he has spent the last 17 years as the Sask head coach for the, Sask head scout for the Swift Current Broncos, and also was the recruiting coordinator for Investors Group for 14 years. So please put your hands together and join me in welcoming our guest speaker from the class of 72, Denny Ulmer'.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be back, and even greater to hear that you people are honoring someone on a yearly basis with the Pere Murray Award. Pere was very instrumental in my life, and I'll go through several things. And hopefully you can get a little bit of a picture of what Pere was like from some of the things I mentioned today. I arrived at Notre Dame in 1969 as a 17-year-old first-year artsman entering the BA program. Pere, we were affiliated at that time with the University of Ottawa, and Pere was the philosophy, social ethics, and Greek and Roman classic teacher in that arts program. So we got to know Pere very, very well. We had around 31 artsmen and women, and all arts people lived in Max Bell Hall. Now, I don't know, you still call it Max Bell, do you? But that was where the arts people lived. And we had constructed, that was the first year that the arts dorm, or any of the new dorms, had been built. That was when I arrived. So I never got an opportunity to live in the old shacks, but we did get an opportunity to go into the new area as such. At that time, Pere lived in Varsity Hall, and he was very active in the daily school operation of Notre Dame. He had moved to Varsity from Lane Hall. You all know where Lane Hall is. That's where Pere lived, just prior to my arrival. And then when Varsity was built, he moved down to Varsity and lived in the north corner, you know where the fireplace is in that area. I guess it's a washroom now. That was Pere's office when I first arrived here at Notre Dame. There was no pavement on Main Street. Pavement was nil. Gumbo was prevalent. Okay, it was just Pere would walk across every day back and forth faithfully to the church, but quite often through the gumbo and the mud, which existed here in the city of Wilcox. City of Wilcox, we'll call it. Varsity Hall also had the rec speech room. Now I think you've moved your rec speech room now over to the archives. But at that time, that was Pere's living room. Okay, that's where he would take guests. Anytime a guest would arrive, Pere would introduce us to them. They would talk a little bit in varsity, but then Pere, when he was hosting these guests, he would take them into the rec speech room, and that served as his living room. It was full of artifacts. It was full of native artifacts. Pere just loved the native culture. And he had a lot of native artifacts. He had pictures of Hitler, who, according to Pere, was, obviously the worst nemesis in the world. Pere had pictures of Hitler, which would initiate conversations. He had all kinds of books. He had all kinds of symbols and all kinds of things in the rec speech room where he would host. There was one television when I arrived here at Notre Dame. There was one television on campus. As far as general populace was concerned, and that was over in varsity. Pere would watch the news every night, and some of us at times would go over and join him. But that served as more or less his nighttime relaxation area. The meals were served at that time by kitchen staff. A bunch of the students would, they would qualify for the position on kitchen staff. And kitchen staff would serve the meals to everyone. It began with the head table, which was up by the fireplace, and that's where Pere and the teachers and the students, or the guests, they would congregate there. And then the older students that were on kitchen staff would serve head table first, and then the rest of the student body. A couple of other things just that might seem a little bit odd, and you'll hear about it in a minute when I'm talking, but all of the juice and the water and stuff was just in a great big barrel in the middle of varsity. So everybody just dipped their cup in. Not very sanitary. Things weren't clean or sanitary when we look at things and the standards that people must keep nowadays. Same with the soup bowl. We had a big ladle in the middle, and people could go up and just fill their soup. And by the end of the meal, you know what young kids are like and young students. By the end of the meal, it would be slippery there, and there'd be all kinds of moisture all around. And I'll tell you later about that incident that I'm going to mention. So Pere lived there. Lane Hall was his pride and joy. He lived in varsity. He would walk up to Lane Hall each day for class. Lane Hall was his pride and joy. That's where all the rare books, the personal library of Robert E. Lee, one of the generals of the Confederate forces in the U.S. Civil War. Pere had gotten a hold of his personal library, so he was very, very influential and grabbed anything free that he could, especially books. Pere just loved books. And Lane Hall became the source of all those books. That's where we kept the books, and that's where we had our classes. His office, as I mentioned, was constantly visited by staff, by students. Pere loved to welcome students to his office. And when he did get a lot of visitors was when Pere smoked fairly steadily. And he always had a cigarette on the go. And whenever Pere got a shipment of cigarettes in, that's when he ended up getting a lot of students going to visit. Because a lot of them, Pere was pretty good at handing out these packages of cigarettes to us. And, it was a little different atmosphere, different type of culture at that time. And, but students would flock there not only to visit Pere, but you know what young people are like. They wanted a shot at some of those cigarettes and whatever Pere would receive in the mail. If he received an order of t-shirts, he would just hand them out to people. So of course, once word hit the dorms, and everybody would flock over there and try to get those t-shirts and stuff, and Pere just loved to visit and share the things. Pere never kept anything for himself, okay? Everything he did was for the students and for Notre Dame. That was basically the way he operated. I guess one of the key things that Pere stressed with us was that life passes so quickly. And I didn't realize this, until I got a little bit older, and you keep getting older, but time does really fly. I can't believe it's 51 years now since I entered the gates of Notre Dame. You look at that's 51 years have just gone by like you wouldn't believe it. And Pere stressed that with us. And one of the things, and I want you people to all remember this message, was he said, it passes so quickly, and don't any of you dare to accept mediocrity. Set some goals in your life, go for things, take pride in what you do, and don't settle for mediocrity. Because life does pass so quickly, and before we know it, we'll be gone. And he was right. He was right. It just flies. So remember that, you young people. He also, the type of student Pere loved, the type of student he liked was a student, not who did everything perfectly, and everything didn't have to be perfect. You just had to give your best. And he loved a guy or a gal who had a spark of rebellion in them. He liked to see that spirit. Somebody who maybe got into trouble every once in a while, but ended up making up for that in a very positive way. So Pere loved that spark of rebellion. He just loved to try to be able to channel that person to become a better human being. Use that spirit properly. So remember that, you people. Don't sit in the back corner. Don't sit and hide. Get out there. Try to do something. Try to make something of your life. If you make a mistake, that's life. Just go on and try to make up for that. Pere's classes were held in Lane Hall, and they were on Pere time. It was Pere time. He would start by speaking about the common good from Messner or a social ethics book. We would always start the class with a book, but we never ended up in the book. It was always, he'd start with something like the common good, and then he'd get on to the more significant things in life, like that plane crash that Rob talked about today. We learn from the daily experiences we go through. Annie King, Pere would have spent half an hour talking about Annie and her exploits. That's great. It's unbelievable, the accomplishment that she has been through. She'll appreciate that, and Notre Dame will appreciate that the rest of her life. I was so proud. I wore my Team Canada coat today because also I didn't realize that Annie was back, which is great. This just adds to it. But Joel Hofer was on the Swift Current Broncos, the team that I'm involved with when we won the Western Hockey League a couple of years ago. Joel Hofer from Team Canada was our goalie. We traded him to Portland for 6 or 7 guys in a rebuild after we won the Western Hockey League. We knew we would have to go through a rebuild, so we traded Joel to Portland, and nobody's more proud of Joel than the Swift Current Broncos. Brad McEwen. Brad hired me at Swift Current. I had hired him at Notre Dame. He hired me at Swift Current when I retired. Brad built that junior, World Canada junior hockey team. That was his task, another hound. Who else was there? Mitch Love. Mitch Love's dad and I were both scouts together with the Swift-Current Broncos, and now Mitch Love's dad both scouts for the Saskatoon Blades, who Mitch coaches. So all of these people, Barrett Hayton, you've heard the name Hayton? Hayton, captain of the Team Canada. Team is, my son Jeff works with him on a daily basis with the Arizona Coyotes. Bernard Docker, how many have heard of Bernard Docker? You know, the defenseman for the Canadian team. He's coached by my other son, Jason, down at the University of North Dakota. So the hockey world is a small world. And Pere loved the accomplishments, and so give her a congratulations. She's done a great job. So Pere would start by, you know, maybe the Greek way. He'd read from Edith Hamilton's The Greek Way. We'd read a little bit, and then we'd start talking. All of a sudden, it'd be noon, and then we'd all be fidgeting and trying to get out of there. Somebody would say, Pere, I think it's lunchtime. He'd just keep talking. So, you know, we never knew when his class would end. There was never a bell. And, but, you know, when you look back, we were the benefactors of that, even though, you know, we were swearing at Pere the whole time, as he kept us sitting there during class when we were supposed to be having lunch. But he operated on his own time. One of the most memorable events of my life, and probably one of the best lessons I ever learned, was from Pere. In my first year, I was fired. I was kicked out of Notre Dame. Myself and the rest of our first year class were all kicked out of Notre Dame. We all had letters written to us, and the letter said, you guys did not show up for class. You're all fired until you come and meet with me on an individual basis. It was a holiday weekend, and we all assumed that it was going to be that it was a holiday. This was Thanksgiving. You know how you get a Friday and a Monday off or whatever. But we didn't show up, and Pere had walked all the way from varsity. He was 70-some years old, 78 years old. And he had walked all the way up from varsity to teach our class, and none of us were there. So he went back to his office. He wrote us all letters. And we all received a letter that Monday when we got back. But before we were ever allowed back into class, we each have to meet individually with Pere. Now talk about scared. Yeah, that was my first year here. You get a little bit scared when you hear that you got to meet with Pere because you've been kicked out. But what he did is he stressed with us the idea of responsibility, commitment, loyalty, and he said most of those what you guys call holidays are holy days. You make sure you know your commitments. And same thing at Christmas. We used to all go home for 4 or 5 days at Christmas, maybe 3 or 4 days, and then we'd all have to come back. Most of us played hockey, and that's when we would go out and we had to represent Notre Dame. We'd go to Thompson, Manitoba to raise money for the school. We'd go to Shaunavon, Saskatchewan to play a weekend hockey tournament there to raise money for the school to fund the hockey program. All of these things, you know, as far as Pere was concerned, Notre Dame was number one, and he wanted us to make sure that we had made our commitment and we lived by it. So commitment and loyalty were key things to him. Pere loved great leaders and depicted a lot of them in Grand Maison art. I see you've got a lot of the Board of Regent pictures over in varsity, but he loved that Grand Maison set of art. Is it up in the Rex Beach room now? Yeah. he loved that that was all the great people of the world. But Pere loved leaders. And John Diefenbaker, George Reed, Ronnie Lancaster, Saskatchewan Roughrider players, Lester Pearson, former Prime Minister, Tommy Douglas, Native leaders, Sitting Bull. Pere talked forever about Sitting Bull. Pere just loved other cultures. And JFK, John F. Kennedy was a martyr, was one of Pere's idols. Winston Churchill, never, 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 never quit. Winston Churchill's motto. Pere loved him. The fellow who carried us through World War II. Jean Beliveau. Some of you any Montreal fans in here? I hope not. Jean Beliveau. Pere loved the Montreal Canadian dynasty, but he also was a really, really loyal fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Pere was very proud of his hounds, who were leaders in politics, sports, religion, education, and medicine. I can remember as an artsman visiting with a group of families. There'd be a group of us go in with Pere. He'd take us in for supper at the Hotel Saskatchewan. He just loved that hotel, and he loved that atmosphere, and they loved him there too. And I can remember going to several dinners with Pere. And in fact, one of the dinners that Pere took us to was our grad dinner when we graduated in third year arts. He took us into the Hotel Saskatchewan. There was 9 or 10 of us. And Pere excused himself from the room. He walked out. He was gone for a few minutes. And then all of a sudden he walked into the room, and with Pere was John Diefenbaker, former Prime Minister of Canada. Pere had called Diefenbaker in to speak to nihilists, and Dief had gone. That was the impact that Pere had. We were amazed and shocked, but that was Pere. He collaborated with, I go by his office at 6 in the morning, the music would be just blaring. He had that radio just cranked up, and he was up phoning Eastern Canada because that's where the Prime Minister and all those people were. He communicated with everyone. So it was a great thrill for us to have John Diefenbaker there to speak to us. Pere expected us all to be clean cut, and he was not impressed by long-haired muckers. He called long-haired muckers, was the name Pere would give to people who were unkempt and were irresponsible and non-caring. Okay, he was constantly swearing about that. I had a loopy eye last night, so just please bear once in a while. One of the key things I remember about Pere too was in the 1972 Canada Winter Games. They were held in Saskatchewan. We built a mountain. Did you know we have a mountain in Saskatchewan? One mountain. And it's Mount Blackstrap up near Saskatoon. It was a mountain that they built for the Canada Winter Games in 1972, and Pere was asked to go and open those games. Well, probably the key event of the whole grand opening of the 1972 Canada Winter Games was when Pere went up to Pierre Elliott Trudeau and said, "You know what, you're a heck of a guy, you'd be a pretty good Prime Minister," he said, "but get a damn haircut." That's what Pere said to the Prime Minister of Canada at that time. Get a haircut. And Pere, of course, got a kick out of that, and then he had a little gruffle, and Trudeau smiled a bit. And these people knew Pere, and they knew what he was like. But that's what he would do. He would say that he was a loyal Canadian who spoke about the unborn greatness of Canada. He said, you people live in the greatest country in the world, do something about it. And he said, we're a melting pot of all cultures. We all have to learn to get along. There has to be a mending wall in all kinds of situations. And we have to learn as Canadians to get along and accept all cultures. Like I said, he loved the natives. He respected all religions. I guess he respected people who were great Catholics, but he was also very accepting of non-denominational students. I was a Protestant myself when I came to know him. Pere accepted us all. And it was a non-denominational school, but we were all to believe in God and have faith and loyalty. He loved symbolism. You guys see it here, every window in this church is some kind of a symbol. 67 Alumnus, who gave the orders in World War II, I think that one was, or both wars. I'm not sure. World War II, I think that one. Everywhere you look on campus, it's symbolism. And there was even symbolism in Pere's, a lot of you might not be aware of this. You know, he's got all kinds of symbols over in the Rick speech room, all kinds of symbols here. Even Pere's grave. Symbolically, we buried Pere. The rock and the bronze and everything on Pere's grave comes from all 10 provinces and 2 territories of Canada, because he so loved Canada. So when he was buried here, he's laying in his coffin looking up at the Tower of God. And the rock on that gravesite, the Board of Regents made sure that that was rock that had come right from every part of Canada. We're getting there. Hopefully I'm not boring you. He loved the Tower of God, and he loved the Greeks and Romans. The bronze doors on the tower were his pride and joy. The bronze doors which were donated for the church here, he was very proud of, which depicted the history of man. I personally and several other artsmen, we would help him hang these different bronze plaques in the tower as they would arrive. And Pere drove our accountant crazy. We had an accountant, Father Len Albers, and every time you turned around, Pere would be ordering some kind of bronze and some kind of stained glass or something very, very expensive and lasting and symbolic. And here Notre Dame was broke all the time. You never knew there were a lot, I talked to Rob this morning, there were a lot of miracles around the school where somehow food made it to the table. Because Pere didn't worry about that. He said that would look after itself. Faith. He was a man of unbelievable faith. And we saw that every day. He'd spend money on the craziest, stupidest things. But he knew what was happening. He knew what he was doing. He knew these symbols would far outlast any of that other. Travel. Oh, he loved to travel. Never sat still. He would either be running across back and forth to the church. He'd be going to do various dinners across Saskatchewan, all over Canada. He'd be on hockey night in Canada one night as a guest. Then he'd be over in, actually when he was 80, he was over in, he made a trip over to Athens, to the Parthenon. How many are familiar with what the Parthenon is in Athens? Great building, the Acropolis. Pere made a trip there. He was climbing up the rocks, up the hill to the Acropolis at 80 years of age, just like a little kid. He was so happy to be he was at Rome. He went to the Vatican. He, What else had he done? Oh, he went and met with Saudi Arabia's king, King Faisal, the richest man in the world. And what he tried to do was get King Faisal to build a Tower of God in Jerusalem, so that all religions of the world and all people of the world would learn to get along. And that's an 80-year-old man all over the world trying to do that kind of stuff. So amazing, we saw some amazing things. When I graduated with my BA in 1972, Pere and Frank Germain asked me to go to St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia and get my BA. And they would guarantee me a job for life at Notre Dame. So I had to weigh that decision because I had already been accepted into the RCMP. But after a little bit of contemplation, I made the decision to go to St. FX and accept that job for life. I never signed a contract at Notre Dame. I was here for 30 years as a teacher and never had a contract. I just lived on a handshake. And that's how we operated at that time. We never signed contracts. We made the commitment, and that was it. So that handshake lasted a long time. I ended up teaching at Notre Dame until 2003 and was very proud when Pere and several hounds attended the wedding of my wife Debbie and I. Pere came to our wedding in 1974, which is, oh my God, that's 46 years ago. A long time. Pere came to our wedding, and I was elated to have my wedding. And we were very, very proud to have several other hounds there as well. I was proud to teach with Pere until his death in 1975, and then through the transition years at Notre Dame until 2003. Right after Pere died, we went through a big struggle. We had a hard struggle. It was, at that time, we had about 140 kids here at Notre Dame. Gradually, we ended up getting it up to about 400. So we went through some very trying times, but then it became very productive because Pere had a very influential family, and Notre Dame kind of struggled and emerged over the years after Pere passed away. People like Murray Maynard, Stuart Maynard, these are two of his nephews, took over the school, and Fred Hill and Wilt Maher, and a fellow by the name, another one of Pere's nephews was Bud McDougall. This is something a lot of you won't know. He was the richest man in Canada. That was Pere's nephew. He owned Massey Ferguson. He owned Dominion Stores. He owned Winfield Farms. He owned Northern Dancer. How many of you have heard of Northern Dancer, the Kentucky Derby winner in the 1960s? He was owned by one of Pere's nephews. So Pere had all kinds of influences he could have gone to for money, but he didn't beg around and do any of that. He, once in a while, I think some of those checks or miracles that popped up, I think might have been little things that came from Bud McDougall and some of those kind of people who quietly, or the Hill family, you know, people who gave a lot to Notre Dame. One final note for the staff. Pere had kind of an interesting, this is kind of neat for you staff members, because it becomes a major commitment to work here. When I was here, we all had to live right here in town, and we were all very, very committed, but when I first started at Notre Dame, my salary was $6,500 a year. You look back, that's what year is that? 1973. I made $6,500 a year, and I taught full-time, coached full-time, we ran the dorm, we did everything, we were all involved heavily into things. And married staff got $7,500 a year. Married staff. So think of those staff members. Frank Germain had 10 kids. he was married with 10 kids, 7,500 a year. But, you know, you were so busy and you were in the trenches. Now, gradually, it's all evolved. Money isn't the key thing, but that just shows you that most of the people involved with Notre Dame were people who were very, very committed. They weren't afraid to put in the hours and put in the work. Everything worked out really well. I do know that personally, Pere was a great mentor. And I think of my own experiences. I married a great lady, Debbie. We've been married 46 years, 45 and 3/4. We have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, all healthy, which is wonderful. I taught, I became a principal, I became an athlete, or I was an athlete, I was a coach. All of these things were very productive. I spent 25 years as a mayor and councillor. Well, you mentioned it, in the village of Wilcox. You know, and there you find some difficulty when you're the mayor of the village, plus you're the principal, and you have to make a decision where you would just try to do what's best. I always remembered the common good. You do things for the common good, for the good of the community, for the good of the school. I spent 15 years in the SHA, traveling all over the province. I coached and played on 7 or 8 provincial champs. I had coached a Canada Games hockey team for Team Saskatchewan. So coached all over the country. I've traveled the world many times. I think I've been to Europe about 16 times now. My kids all played in Europe, so we made several trips all over Europe, back and forth. I've associated with people all over the world. Anywhere I go, I pretty well know somebody. So all of this has benefited, you know, both Notre Dame and benefited us. All in all, it's been very good, and all of the above, I owe to Pere Murray of Notre Dame. So, thank you. Or to keep the other class. You guys must be offended.
So thank you for coming out today and sharing your stories. On behalf of the staff and students, we'd like to give you this.